Hey, hello everyone. Good evening. Welcome to our departmental seminar. Today I'm honored to introduce our guest, or God's guest, Kinga Migalska, who is a historian and art historian. Dr. Migalska graduated from Jagiellonian University in Krakow and recently completed her PhD dissertation concerning the history and the development of Jewish museum in Poland during communist era. Her research interest focuses on the fate of Jewish material heritage in post-war Poland. She is an author of several scientific and popular science articles. In the past few years, she has participated in multiple monuments inventorying projects, including the inventory of historic Roman Catholic churches and monasteries in the territories of Volhynia, Ukraine, and the inventory of the historic Jewish cemetery in Milówka, Poland. Kinga, thank you for coming, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe I will start with the presentation. No. This one. Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay. So before I will make it the slideshow. Thank you very much. I'm very happy that I have the opportunity to present my research in front of such a wonderful audience. And without further ado, I think that I will start go on to the topic. So, yeah, is it now as
Yes,
slideshow? Yeah, okay.
seeing full screen, yes.
Okay. So the topic of the Jewish material heritage and its fate, especially in urban spaces in communist Poland, is actually not new. It was researched and analyzed by at least several researchers so far. And just to mention on the more analytical side, it was, for example, researched by Michal Weissman or Ruth Gruber and Michael Menk. And on the more cataloging side by Samuel Gruber, by Eleonora Bergman, Jan Jagielski, and many more. However, in my research, I decided to focus on a very specific part of this heritage. The Jewish past of Polish cities and towns and its tragic end was suppressed in the collective memory of Polish society after World War II, and also in the other European countries up until the end, maybe the middle of 1980s. The Jewish past of Polish cities and towns and its tragic end was suppressed in the collective memory of Polish society. Okay. The topic began to return more widely in Polish public debate in the 1990s. And in many, especially smaller towns, the history of local Jewish communities is still being discovered. In this context, there are several towns where the restoration of the memory of pre-war Jewish inhabitants or the Polish Jewish society at large began somewhat earlier, and these examples include the Tykocin and Włodawa. In my research, I wanted to analyze how this whole situation, situation I just described, resonated in Polish museums, especially these museums that use the buildings of synagogues. There were four such institutions. The oldest one was the museum in Old Synagogue in Krakow. There was another one in Łańcut, and the youngest, the relatively youngest in this group were cases of Tykocin and Włodawa. So the first one, maybe one more thing, because as I said, the topic of the Jewish material heritage was researched. However, the topic of Polish museums and museology in Poland in the communist era is still somewhat new. So it was also one of my of the main reasons why I decided to research this topic. So the Great Synagogue in Tykocin is located at the former main square of the historical Jewish district of the town called Kaczorów. It was built in the 1640s when the town was a recognized center of Jewish culture and Talmudic learning. The new house of prayer was house of prayer was built in a type characteristic for the 17th century synagogues of the eastern lands of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, an almost square-shaped hall with a so-called bima tower. In the 18th century, the synagogue was partially rebuilt. Moreover, a C-shaped market hall was erected on its northern side, and at the end of the 18th century, a masonry Beit Midrash was built in the row of buildings along the western wall of the synagogue. During the Second World War, the Nazis converted the synagogue into a warehouse and demolished the Talmudic house, while the collections of ritual objects and the rich library stored in both buildings were looted or destroyed. On August 25 and 26, 1941, all Jewish inhabitants of Tykocin, approximately 2,100 people, were transported to the forest near the village of Łopuchowo and executed. I have to mention here that first, after the start of the Second World War, Tykocin became a part of the USSR occupation zone, but after the beginning of the German invasion on USSR, it came under the Nazi occupation. Until the mid 1950s, so you can see here how the synagogue and the market hall and the Beit Midrash looked like before the Second World War. After the Second World War, in the mid-1950s, the synagogue continued to serve as a warehouse. In the meantime, due to the shortage of building materials in the town, the local population dismantled the women's galleries. You can see here the remains on the wall. Finally, in 1957, the synagogue and also in 1962, the ruins of the Bet Midrash were entered into the Polish Register of Immovable Monuments. In 1960, initial conservation works were undertaken at the synagogue, which included rebuilding the women galleries and filling in the gaps in the walls and roof of the building. It is actually not, here's the remains, here were the remains of the Beit Midrash. Here's the synagogue, and this was in the mid-1960s when the almost whole Kaczorów district, which was mostly wooden houses, burned to the ground. It is not actually certain who and when made the decision to establish a museum in the Tykocin Great Synagogue and Bet Midrash. It was probably a simultaneous initiative to many bodies of the government, municipal and provincial authorities, provincial conservator of monuments also. An expert opinion on the state of the preservation of the synagogue was prepared in 1965-66. And at this time, for the first time, the documents mention the plan to establish a museum.
Kinga, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but maybe you can disable your presenter view. We see the
Okay.
slide and the next slide.
Okay.
So just full screen.
No, not.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
better?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Sorry.
Um, okay. Uh, yes. At this time, the town of Tykocin, which developed dynamically in the 18th century, was marginalized. No, I'm sorry. The town of Tykocin, which was mostly developing in 17th and 18th century, was in 19th century marginalized by the nearby Białystok, which developed as a much larger city. And as a result of this, the town survived until the second half of the 20th century with an almost unchanged 18th century urban plan and a huge amount of historic architecture. The historical and historic potential of the town's urban layout was quickly recognized by the provincial authorities in Białystok, and as a result, the conservation works came and were aimed at adapting it to house the museum that was to be established there. It was an element of a broad renovation campaign of all the most valuable monuments in Tykocin. The municipal authorities decided then that the synagogue will host a museum of Baroque. It was the initial plan to make it a museum of Baroque, although the mentions about this particular topic are I think once or twice in the documents, and after that they vanish. And the idea of the museum changes to a historical and more regional museum. The Tykocin Museum was, another thing, around 1970, local authorities also made a decision to rebuild the former Bet Midrash, because as you could see on the previous slide, it was totally ruined at that time. The Tykocin Museum was officially opened on November 1st, 1976, and in its first year hosted 3 exhibitions shown in the Bet Midrash. It was probably already planned then to dedicate the interior of the Bet Midrash to presenting the Polish part of Tykocin history, while the synagogue would present Jewish themes, although according to Andrzej Lechowski, who at the beginning of the history of the museum was the head of the Tykocin branch, because the museum was established as a branch of the Białystok Regional Museum. So Lechowski was the chief of this Tykocin branch, and after that, since 1990, I think, going director of the Białystok Museum itself. So he said in one of the interviews that in the first years of the Tykocin institution's existence, there was pressures, probably external, but he didn't explain it, to weaken the Jewish tone of the museum. Its employees, the museum's employees, however, did not yield to these pressures. Understanding that the evocative form of the synagogue does not allow its original purpose to be forgotten. From the very beginning, they have been working hard, on one hand, to present local history and culture, and on the other to learn from scratch and at a rapid pace about Jewish culture and history. The first Judaica exhibits appeared in the collection of the museum in Tykocin already in the year of its opening, and these were acquired through purchase. These were 4 balsamists, 2 Hanukkah lamps, and 1 2-eared quart. The availability of Judaica on the market at that time was limited, as was the financial outlay that the museum could allocate for this purpose at one time. So on many occasions, the curators, when displaying Judaica in the synagogue, they used the iconographic reproductions instead. In the following years, the Judaica collection quickly expanded, and I have to mention that the Tykocin Museum usually consulted with experts from the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw and the National Museum in Warsaw when searching for and assessing Judaica to its collection. Only some of the Judaica offers submitted to the museum had a known provenance. It's around, I would say, 10, maybe 20 objects. By 1990, the museum had acquired 2/3 of the entire stock of Jewish ritual objects that is currently in its collection, as well as almost 40 paintings and drawings with Jewish themes. In 2007, the number of Judaica in the Tykocin Museum collection was slightly over 200 objects, which was less than 6% of the entire collection. In 1978, the interior of the synagogue was open to visitors, where a small collection of Judaica acquired by the museum was presented. The sparseness of the Judaics exhibition was not a big problem because the monumental interior of the Great Hall itself, with its impressive polychromes, was the most important point of the tour. Oh, I wanted to also to show you that in the end of 1970s, there was also for a moment a plan to rebuild the market hall, the Jewish market hall, in the north side of the synagogue, and it was the idea was to make it for touristic purposes, mostly with the gastronomic kiosks and maybe some bar and some other utility shops, mostly directed to the tourists, because the municipality and also the authorities in Tykocin believed that and hoped that the museum will gather a lot of tourists. Okay, so in 1978, the interior of the synagogue was open to visitors, where a small collection of Judaica acquired by the museum was presented. And in 1986, the museum also presented an exhibition in the synagogue entitled, I'm sorry, I don't have any photographs from this event, To the Living and the Dead, which consisted of photographs by the famous Polish documentary filmmaker Tadeusz Rolke and the artist Jerzy Budziszewski or Joshua Benor. The series presented Jewish cemeteries, mostly Jewish cemeteries. The following year, the museum presented two exhibitions, Judaica by Danuta Irena Przybylska, which was mostly a textile exhibition, and Judaica from the collection of the State Archaeological Museum in Warsaw. It was also a curious example of the Judaica collections in Poland after the Second World War, because the collection that was housed and is owned by the State Archaeological Museum in Warsaw was created on the decision, basing on the decision of the communist government in Poland. The Ministry of the government decided that there should be a central collection of Judaica in Polish museum, in one of Polish museums, and then they decided that it should be housed in the Archaeological Museum in Warsaw. And the museum itself didn't actually have the space to present the collection, so it was on more than one occasions lended to other museums, for example, to the Tykocin Museum. In the early 1990s, the synagogue housed 3 permanent Judaic exhibitions. An exhibition of Judaica in the men's hall, as you can see here, and arrangements presenting the Passover Seder and the rabbi's room on 2 levels of the corner tower of the synagogue. Here's the arrangement, the display of the rabbi's room. And here's the Seder Pesach. The photos are from 2019. However, the display did not change very. It's not very different from the one that was arranged in the beginning of 1990s. The small room presenting the Passover Seder was created in a room on the second floor of the tower and had the character of a storage exhibition. Initially intended as a temporary exhibition, it was eventually made permanent. The interior was and still is arranged as the dining room of a more moderately wealthy Jewish family from the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. Since the beginning of the 1990s, the list of the temporary exhibitions on broadly understood Judaic themes presented by the museum in Tykocin has been growing. In some years, the ratio of Judaic exhibitions to exhibitions on other themes was 50-50. Most of them were exhibitions borrowed from other institutions or created in cooperation with them. The Tykocin synagogue, although not located on the main market square, due to the low height of the residential building surrounding it, constitutes, together with the parish Catholic church on the other side of the main market, the two largest dominants in the landscape of the city center. There is no doubt that the Tykocin Museum had and still has a very large influence on its surroundings, not only as a clear urban accent, which the synagogue constitutes, but above all, due to its links with numerous cultural organizations and involvement in the development of Tykocin and its region. From the very beginning, the museum staff regularly participated in meetings of the Tykocin Municipal National Council. That was the name of the local authorities in the early stage of the communist regime, thus having a real influence on the cultural program implemented in the city. The museum became very quickly the main driving force of tourism in Tykocin. The town was badly damaged during World War II and depopulated by the Holocaust, which contributed to the loss of its city rights in 1950, which it regained in 1993 with the significant help of the museum staff. The presence of tourists in the town must therefore have been very noticeable. The museum in Tykocin has been also the organizer and co-organizer of cultural events aimed primarily at local residents many times in its history by organizing concerts, lectures or meetings of the literature salon. And the museum played another additional role for the town by promoting it on the international stage, because there are some mentions even from the 1980s that there were international tourists in visiting the museum. And it's also important to say that the museum staff, it was thanks to museum staff that the annual commemoration of the day of the extermination of all Tykocin Jews was made as a permanent event every year. The role of this institution in the development of Tykocin was so important that in the autumn of 1990, the mayor and councillors of the Tykocin commune discussed to take over the museum from the management of the district of museum in Białystok. It did not finally happen. Despite the relatively wide range of activities described above, research conducted at the beginning of the 21st century showed that the museum was only able to influence to a certain extent the perception of the Jewish history of Tykocin by its contemporary residents, especially the older generation. In 2005, Agata Smagała, a student of ethnology and cultural anthropology of the University in Warsaw, conducted a series of interviews with the residents of Tykocin and included their analysis in the work Living the Life of the City, the Role and Functions of the Museum in Tykocin. The results of her research gave a very interesting picture of the relationship between the residents of Tykocin and the museum, although they were conducted on a relatively small research group. It was only 25 people, almost exclusively from one age group. It was 60 to 70 years old, and of a similar social status. All of her interviewees admitted that at some point in their lives they had the opportunity to visit the museum, but they do not visit it regularly, and their knowledge on how the museum was established, was what is inside it, is rather superficial. Despite this, the interviewees expressed satisfaction with the presence of the museum in the town and praised its educational activities, which were important for building patriotic attitudes and local identity of the young generation. The respondents emphasized that this institution takes care of the monuments entrusted to it. Some of them also personally praised the then director of the museum, whose activities for the development of the town were very visible. At the same time, upon hearing about the attempt to regain the synagogue by the Jewish religious community in Warsaw, the respondents showed a clearly combative attitude in defense of the preservation of the museum by its current owner. There were not many people in the study group who wanted to talk in more detail about the history of Tykocin Jews, although they were the generation that should at least partially remember some of them. But there were very negative opinions about various Jewish groups coming to Tykocin. We can therefore draw the sad conclusion that the educational activities of the museum employees conducted for 3 decades at that time, aimed at broadening the knowledge of the town residents about Jewish history and culture, did not bring the intended effect, at least as far as its older generation was concerned. Simultaneously, Tykocin, mainly due to the presence of the museum, has become a very attractive place on the route of Polish tourism, by its historical, monumental, and also on a Jewish history tourism trail. At the same time, it has maintained the idyllic character of a small provincial town, and its population still oscillates around 2,000. In recent years, the situation of the museum has remained stable. On the one hand, it can be seen as an external satellite of the Podlasie Museum, on the other hand, as one of the local but very important centuries of cultural life. Alan Duben, an American anthropologist, visited Tykocin in 2014. He came there because his grandmother came from Tykocin, and noted a number of observations about how this small town currently deals with the Jewish heritage. Among the questions that troubled him during this visit, one in particular is worth noting, and I quote, "I wonder how the Goyim of Tykocin managed to endure the terrifying silence that fell on the morning of August 26, 1941, in the abandoned houses. In the houses where there were still chairs, tables covered with tablecloths, toys, books, food products for dinner, where the ordinaries of everyday life has been hostily abandoned. And those streets, shops, quiet, abandoned, empty. How could one endure this overwhelming absence?" So today, similar questions are asked about many cities, towns, and villages in Poland, coming from both Poles and Jews. For the Polish side of this discourse, however, this is a relatively new question, and it was certainly not asked very loudly in the 1980s when the or 1970s when the museum in Tykocin began its history. Since then, 2 more generations of Poles have entered adulthood, more open to difficult answers about Polish history in the 20th century, although the discourse around difficult issues in Polish-Jewish relations in the public sphere has changed only slightly. Meanwhile, Tykocin, as Jeffrey Chandler put it, has become one of the centers of Polish shtetl tourism and a place of multi-layered work, architectural renewal, museums, tourism, and performance art, which in all its manifestation is based on selective remembering and forgetting. And on one hand, that is true. The history that is presented, history more a cultural aspect is presented in the museum in Tykocin is selective. Because the Tykocin and people in Tykocin, they are still rediscovering their history, and also the Jewish part of this history. The second example, the museum in the synagogues in Włodawa, or Łęczyńsko-Włodawskie Lakeland Museum in Włodawa. The first Jewish settlers were recorded in Włodawa in the 1530s, but the dynamic demographic and economic development of the town's Jewish community took place primarily at the turn of the 17th and 18th centuries. At that time, Jews concentrated in their hands most of the local production of so-called forest goods. For example, timber, charcoal, tar, etc. Almost monopolized trade and river transport of all products, as well as distilling, and in the 19th century also the fishing industry. In the 1760s, the Jews of Włodawa built a monumental masonry synagogue called the Great Synagogue. I will explain in a moment why the great part. On a street leading south from the town market square, more or less in the place where a previous wooden synagogue probably stood. The synagogue originally consisted of a high and spacious rectangular main hall covered with a 9-field vault supported by 4 massive columns, arranged symmetrically in relation to the axis of the building, 2 single-story elongated women halls added to the men's hall from the north and south, and a rectangular annex from the west, flanked by 2 two-story pavilions. The architectural model used in the Great Synagogue in Włodawa due to the introduction of corner pavilions was an unusual solution for brick synagogues, while in the 18th century it was often used in the wooden structures of synagogues in the eastern lands of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Włodawa synagogue was not only masonry synagogue built was not the only masonry synagogue built in this shape, but it is probably the oldest example of the use of this solution. A little later, certainly before 1786, a second synagogue was built on its northern side, called the Small Synagogue or the Old Bet Midrash. You can see it here. On an elongated plan with a 2-story vestibule added to the men's hall on the west. Both of these buildings were partially destroyed during the First World War and renovated in the interwar period. At the end of the 1920s, in the vicinity of the Great and Small Synagogues in the northwestern part of the quarter, the Włodawa Jewish community erected a 3rd building called by the locals the New Bet Midrash. It was a single-story building with an attic, originally divided in the ground floor into 2 rectangular rooms. During World War II, During World War II, shortly after entering Włodawa, the Nazis established a closed ghetto in which they imprisoned the entire local Jewish community. And in 1940, they opened a forced labor camp for Jews. In 1942-43, most of the Włodawa Jews were transported to the Sobibór extermination camp and murdered there. All the Kahal buildings were transformed into military warehouses. The equipment, including the bima and interior decorations of the Great and Small Synagogues, were devastated. In the first year after the war, the local authorities of the town continued to use the synagogue buildings as warehouses, although some of the Jews of Włodawa returned to the city to the town. The entire synagogue complex was transferred to the management of the communal cooperative called Samopomoc Chłopska. It can be translated to the peasant self-service. I'm not sure. In order to fully understand the place that the Łęczyńsko-Włodawskie Lakeland Museum occupies in the space of Włodawa, we must go back to World War II and the first post-war years, as well as the social and political and geographical changes that these events brought with them. Włodawa was liberated in July 1944. At the time, the Ukrainian population dominated the entire district. It was approximately 80% of the total population. Poles constituted approximately 15%, while Jews only 5%. The areas around Włodawa were a field of active fighting with the armed underground, Polish and Ukrainian. A repatriation point was established in the city, through which significant numbers of people passed. Almost all Jews from among the pre-war residents were murdered. Ukrainians were forced to move to the territories occupied by the USSR. The rest were eventually resettled to the recovered territories of Poland. At the end of 1944, there were about 4,000 people living in Włodawa, including 3,800 Poles, 200 Ukrainians, and around 90 Jews. 2 years later, the city population increased by 400 people, but the number of Jewish residents was smaller and smaller with each year. As a result of the new borders of the Polish state being drawn in 1944-45, the geopolitical location of Włodawa changed. The town found itself on the border, in the border zone with the USSR, and in the longer term on the border of three countries, Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus. Border life left its mark on Włodawa and still partially determines its existence, especially culturally. The Bug River, which for centuries was the source of income for many Włodawa residents, suddenly became, as Konrad Górny, the author of an anthropological analysis on the culture forming role of the book, put it, the border of fear. In the times of the Polish People's Republic, and by that I mean the communist regime, the saying that birds turn back on the book became very popular. The state border actually tore Włodawa in two, because the second part of the town, Tomaszówka, together with the Włodawa railway station, old cemeteries, and a large part of the pre-war inhabitants remained on the other side of the river and in the other country. There is no border crossing in Włodawa due to the lack of a bridge over the Bug. The problem of the inconvenient location of the town did not disappear with the fall of the USSR, but in fact intensified because the eastern border of Poland first became the border of NATO, and then the European Union and the Schengen era. The third important factor that shaped modern Włodawa and provided the basis for establishing, okay, I can show you. This is the last known photo of Włodawa Jews after the Second World War, in a larger number inside the synagogue. The third important factor that shaped modern Włodawa and provided the basis for establishing the Łęczyńsko-Włodawskie Lakeland Museum was the extensive development plan for the city undertaken in the 1960s, focused particularly on tourism. A decade earlier, the administrative authorities noticed that the city was overpopulated and therefore decided to expand it. And at the same time, in Okuninka, which was a village next to Włodawa, located south of Włodawa, the tourist infrastructure has developed for holiday makers coming to the nearby lakes, and the Włodawa authorities repeatedly emphasized the importance of the historic town center with its 17th and 18th century monuments and Baroque urban layout. So the establishment of a museum, which is housed in all three buildings of the synagogue complex, promoting the culture of the region, which happened in 1981, was a natural decision in this situation. In the first years of its existence, the museum in Włodawa carried out its exhibition activities primarily of an ethnographic nature. The basis for the gradually expanded collection of this institution was a set of items related to the region's fishing industry. Despite this, the museum staff have tried from the very beginning to collect objects related to local history and Judaica, and the first temporary And the first temporary Judaic exhibition entitled From the History and Culture of Polish Jews was opened in 1983 in connection with the 14th anniversary of the outbreak of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. It was not the only museum event that happened at that time. In Poland, that was somewhat connected with the Jewish topics and the 14th anniversary of the outbreak of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. The exhibition was shown in the vestibule and the women gallery above of the Great Synagogue, and began with a display case and boards telling the story of the extermination of Jews during World War II. I unfortunately do not have any photographs from this first exhibition. In the women's gallery, on the other hand, there was a collection of ritual objects, balsamins, glasses and cups, elements of the Klei Kodesh, candlesticks, seals and textiles, Hebrew text, including a Torah scroll and the Book of Esther, and 8 paintings showing traditionally depicted figures of Jews and Jewish women. Since all these objects came from the pre-war period, the layout of the exhibition reversed the chronological order, consciously emphasizing the fact that the continuity of the Polish Jewish community was brutally interrupted and only artifacts remained. Until the end of the 1980s, the Włodawa synagogue hosted as many as 5 temporary Judaic and quasi-Judaic exhibitions, which focused mostly on the cultural aspects. Since the 1990s, the Great Synagogue has almost exclusively hosted Judaic themed exhibitions. What you can see on the picture is the main hall of the Great Synagogue before the year 1990. At the time, the exhibition, the display about the local fishing industry or the culture of local fishermen was still available to see in the main hall. Since the 1990s, the Great Synagogue has almost exclusively hosted Judaic-themed exhibitions, with the permanent Judaica exhibition in the main hall and the temporary art or historical exhibitions shown in the other spaces, mostly the vestibule and the women's balcony. While the displays in Small Synagogue and the Kahal House have presented ethnographic and historical themes, as well as exhibitions on cultures of the world, or they called it also the exotic exhibitions. In 1996, the curators added, I should show it earlier. This is the arrangement of 2, at that time, temporary exhibitions, but the second one, the one on the right, later became the permanent Judaica exhibition. In 1996, the curators added in the main hall of the Great Synagogue another permanent exhibition, historical this time, focused on the history of Włodawa Jews, illustrated by the photographs published years earlier in Sefer Zikaron Włodawa Saviva Sobibor. These are the examples of other temporary exhibitions in 1990s. And on the right side, there's a photo of the so-called Włodawa Włodawa treasure. It was 21, if I'm not mistaken, 21 objects that were recovered during the excavation works on one of the Włodawa streets. This is the photo of these objects before the restoration. They are now restored and on the display in the synagogue. The museum began gathering its collection of Judaica shortly after it opened. The first Judaic objects were entered into the inventory book in 1984. It was 7 silver Kiddush cups and 1 glass, purchased in the Lublin branch of the DESA. DESA was a national enterprise that had the monopoly on the art market in Poland at the communist times. 2 Hanukkahs purchased in the DESA in Warsaw, 1 purchased glass and a talit and tefillin cover received as a gift from private donors. The names are unknown. Unlike other subsections of the museum's collections in Włodawa, the Judaic collection was the only one not limited in principle to collecting according to local origin. In the case of Judaica, the decisive factors were availability of on the market, the price, and the funds available at the time of the purchase. The Judaica collection of the Museum of Włodawa, currently consisting of almost 200 objects and mostly acquired through purchase, with only a few items coming to the collection as gifts. Over 1/3 of this collection was acquired by the museum in Włodawa by the end of the 1980s. In the 1990s were a time for defining the character and mission of the museum in Włodawa. In the 1980s, it operated only in 3 categories: collecting, exhibitions, and education. In the following decade, by that I mean 1990s, it also developed research and publishing activities, including a popular science magazine, Muzeum Pojezierza Łęczyńsko-Włodawskiego we Włodawie, zeszyty muzealne, that's the title, opened a branch office. It was actually almost autonomical museum, the museum in the former extermination camp in Sobibór, and became actively involved in shaping the cultural zone of the city's residents. In the first 2 decades of the 21st century, museums employees initiated a public discussion on the specifics of the borderland and the positive aspects of multiculturalism. In 1998, Marek Bem, who was later director of the museum, and he was also a creator of the Three Cultures Festival, the largest mass event in Włodawa, promoting the historical multiculturalism of the region, and later he was a director of the museum. And Ewa Podlewska-Bem formulated and published a program to make the Włodawa's museum offer more attractive. This program assumed broad marketing activities and, more importantly, strengthening cooperation with other local cultural institutions. For example, by the festival. Indeed, the first edition of the Three Cultures Festival in 1995 was co-organized by the museum and the Włodawa Cultural Center. However, the subsequent ones were led by the museum itself, while still engaging other city institutions in cooperation. The authors of the program defined one of the goals of the museum's activities as reducing the distance of misunderstanding, alienation, and uncertainty of feelings towards Jewish heritage, emphasizing that the need to bring visitors closer and accustom them to Jewish culture in the most comprehensive way possible. A few years later, the museum project entitled Cultural Heritage of Włodawa, Festival of Three Cultures, also included the commemoration of the armed uprising in Sobibór, aimed at expanding knowledge about the history of the Sobibór extermination camp and honoring its victims. The success of the first editions of the Three Cultures Festival inspired the management of the museum to make the historical multiculturalism of Włodawa the main focus of its activities. The visual and symbolic traces of historical multiculturalism in the town space cannot be ignored. Walking along one communication route, you can visit places unique to all three religions once popular in Włodawa: Judaism, Orthodoxy, and Catholicism. Although only two of them still have their followers in the town, while the third, as a symbolic prosthetic, is represented on a daily basis by the museum. It is, of course, artificially constructed multiculturalism because there is not a single resident in the town identifying as a Jew. And although in the second half of the 1980s, representatives of the Ukrainian minority became active in the region, they did not constitute a group influencing the shaping of local cultural policy. And by the end of the 1990s, they became practically invisible again. The real cultural division therefore runs along religious lines between residents attending church and those praying in the Orthodox Church and a small group of Jehovah's Witnesses. Interesting conclusions about the contemporary understanding of Włodawa as a multicultural place were brought by sociological research conducted by Mirosław Bieniecki at the turn of the 20th and 21st centuries. It was part of a broader research project on local communities of the Polish borderland. During interviews with the residents of Włodawa, Bieniecki stated that thanks to the festival organized there, the Three Cultures Festival, a climate of multiculturalism and a sense of participation in many interpreting cultures is introduced into the life of the town, even though the residents represent the vast majority of only one of the celebrated cultures. He also noted that this process is driven primarily by local activists and enthusiasts, such as Marek Bem, the aforementioned director of the museum in Włodawa at that time, who will, while being very involved in researching local history, also takes care of restoring its multiculturalism. Bieniecki described Włodawa as an example of a new urban local culture dominated by the tension between the postulated and the desired multiculturalism, which is not accompanied by actual multiculturalism, and the imagination of a possible idealized multiculturalism in the future. Also noting that the project of constructing such a culture may actually succeed in the case. Today, the festival still happens almost every year, although the last years were not very lucky to the town, firstly because of the COVID pandemic, and then after that because of the tensions on Polish and Belarusian borders. And through the festival, historical multiculturalism, all the cultures of the historical Włodawa, thanks to the existence of the festival, are presented to the residents of Włodawa and the region in an attractive, colorful way through the presentation of various culinary customs and languages, as well as dance, music, theater, fine arts, and literature. Although difficult topics such as the Holocaust are also woven in this riot of multisensory experiences, they remain somewhat on the margins of the celebrations. The organizers try to maintain visual equality, a separate day and separate exhibitions are devoted to each of the three cultures. But meanwhile, before the Second World War, there was no demographic balance in Włodawa, and Jews constituted the vast majority of the city inhabitants. How it is connected with the museum itself? The museum is the main organizer of the festival, and is very involved in its organization, in its promotion, but at the same time, the exhibition activities are still ongoing. So the Great Synagogue is still hosts, I think, exclusively the Jewish themed exhibitions. There is the Judaica display in the main hall of the Great Synagogue, and the vestibule, the pavilions, and the women spaces are mostly for the temporary exhibitions. You can see, for example, the exhibition of a local sculptor who made a series of sculptures inspired by the traditional Jewish look. These are the two displays which intentions are to mimic the original spaces. On the left side, it's the Melamad's room. As you can see, there are also the two figures of praying men. And on the right side, there is the display in the women's hall on the southern part, southern annex of the Great Synagogue. It is arranged as if the women of the community just left or will come back in a moment. And by that I mean there are books not only on religious topics and displayed on the pulpits. The wide range of the books is mainly because there was, at the time I was there last time, there was no employee in the museum that knew Yiddish or Hebrew enough to know which books are actually on the religious topics and which were on the more secular topics. But also in the display there are the women purses, which indicate that the women from the society, the women will come back soon. So this is on the left, this is the interior of the small synagogue that was restored in the 1980s. The problem with the small synagogue, there was a slide before, I will try to come back there. So the problem with the small synagogue was that when the authorities decided to conserve the Great Synagogue and to establish the museum, they did not actually have enough funds to do the renovations also in the small synagogue at the same time. So the works began almost simultaneously in both synagogues, but they had to stop in the small synagogue. And up until 1990 or 1991, the small synagogue was roofless, as you can see, and the windows were not covered enough. So the polychromies, the paintings in the walls inside the small synagogue were further damaged by the atmosphere. And so when the restoration was finished, many parts of the paintings were long gone. The parts that were still able to restore if they were properly stored in the beginning of the 1980s. But so the second photo I'm showing you is an exhibition that was primarily in the Great Synagogue in the main hall. not one-to-one, of course, but the exhibition on the the ethnographical exhibition on the local culture, mostly the culture of local fishermen, was moved to the attic of the small synagogue. And I am only showing you the only part in this exhibition where the Jewish person or Jewish topic is shown. This is the arrangement of an inn with a young bearded man, which we can assume is a portrait of a Jewish innkeeper of the inn. So the interesting fact that I want to conclude with is that in the last 10 years, I think it started in 2014. The museum acquired funds to make large-scale renovation of all three buildings. This is the synagogue district, as they call it. This is the great synagogue, this is the small synagogue, and this is the Kahal house, and that was built as the last, and it houses now the offices of the museum and also a small exhibition room in the ground floor. So during this renovation works, the museum decided to also arrange the space, the green space in front of the synagogue. They decided to arrange it as a menorah. So on one hand, we have this journey from the time up until the beginning of 1980s, where the synagogues, these buildings, were just next to the main market and in the center of the town exactly, and they were not particularly visible for the locals. Because they were still warehouses or they were not used at all to today when the town and the museum employees want to show the character of this area. And they want it to be visible also from space. And I think I conclude with that. Yeah. Thank you very much. And I'm open for questions. If you maybe want to see any of the slides again.
Kinga, thank you very much for very interesting lecture. We will be now opening to question, and Lior is the first one, and I see Miriam have a question. So maybe if you just close your
presentation, okay.
Yeah, the presentation, that we can see each other.
Thank you very much. I very much enjoyed the presentation. It brought back memories from, I visited Tykocin 8 years ago, and it made a big impact on me. I'd never seen it. It's an incredible synagogue with all the inscriptions on the walls. And what helped make a big impact for me was the connection with the rabbis that lived in Tykocin and published important works. One was the Marshaw, whose commentaries on the Talmud are found in the back of almost every single Talmud edition published today, and also Rabbi Yehuda of Tykocin, who was one of the first prominent editors of the Be'er Hetev commentary to the Shulchan Aruch, which is also found today in all of the all editions of Shulchan Aruch. And the connection between these authors, these great historical authors, which are well known to everyone, and the location, the somewhat abandoned, the forgotten Jewish community, putting these two together, how the incredible vitality of the scholarly works versus the total destruction of the Jewish community, that made a big impact on me. I wonder if you could address this more detail.
I'm not sure if I understand correctly. How do you want me to address it? The problem, I would try. If I'm wandering in the wrong direction, please let me know. So the problem with the museum or the knowledge about the Jews coming from Tykocin, historically coming from Tykocin in Tykocin, is still a problem because there are many blank spaces, and I mean not only in the history itself, but in the knowledge of the locals. Because on one hand, I pictured the museum as the main force that began the search for knowledge. The problem, however, is that for many years there was actually, and still there's actually no specialist who could focus primarily on the Jewish history. So the exhibitions, the research that was made, for example, in the 1980s and 1990s, was mostly made by the employees that were they were learning on the ground. While they were researching for anything, they were learning. They did not actually have a lot of material to base on. They had to learn a lot of it by themselves, and so the knowledge was rather superficial. Although it was also, I have to say, it was very important, of course. But the exhibitions, for example, were mostly on the Judaica or maybe some paintings that were strictly connected, associated with the Jews, as the Poles understood who the Jews were at that point. So I think the last maybe 15 years, because we are now in 2025. So maybe 15 years is the time that the research is more thorough. There's not only the museum, but there are other institutions or the non-government organizations, NGOs that want to research this history. And I think that part of the Iskor book is translated at now, but only partially. They still work on it. So the history is still in the research. However, the synagogue itself is is monumental, is beautiful. And when I was there doing my research, I have to say I had the privilege to meet the most, I think the most invested in this research, people that work there. Unfortunately, none of them works there now. I'm not sure how the research on the Jewish part of the Włodawa history looks right now. I was there before the COVID pandemic, and they were at that time in the process of rebuilding, rearranging the exhibitions, the main historical exhibition in the Bet Midrash and the exhibitions in the synagogue. So I'm not sure how these topics are now shown there. Or displayed is displayed there, but thanks, for example, to the cooperation with Alan Duben that I mentioned before, there is much more that happens now in Tykocin, and on the other hand, there are still aspects of this touristic side of Tykocin that we can still argue with. For example, a couple of years earlier, there was next to the main entrance to the Great Synagogue, there was, for example, a stand with the little figurines of the Jews with the coin that were sold by the local man who did not see anything wrong with it. There are, I think, two restaurants nearby the synagogue that claim that they're in the Jewish style, although they are not kosher. For example, maybe something changed, but when I was there last year, they were not kosher. So. There are some changes that are still on the run, but I think there's still much to do there to show the whole complex history and the mostly the people that that constituted that created the Tykocin that we know now. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you, Kinga. It is good to see you again. Thank you very much for your lecture. And I have basically two more object-oriented questions. You mentioned a few times, but maybe you can sort of sum up. I'm not sure if I followed correctly. Where the collections come from in both places, in Tykocin and in Włodawa. And especially you mainly concentrate on Judaica, but I'm interested very much in paintings, drawings, and prints, and you showed some of them. Some of them were hanging on the walls, and you mentioned them. So basically, another question is not about the provenance, but rather, is there any documentation currently existing of those works, artistic works, like lists, names of artists? And if so, whom can I contact to find out what do they have there?
Okay. So for first question first. If I understand correctly, you are asking how the collections were created, or are you more interested in from what region were the objects that are in the collections?
Yeah, mainly. You mentioned at some point that some things were sent from Warsaw to Tykocin, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder if there are also some artifacts that are local. How did they get these things together? Where they came from when they started to exhibit?
Okay, so the problem is most of the objects either in Tykocin or in Włodawa, they do not have the provenance or the history attached to it. There are some examples. I'm not sure if I can find it now. So there are some examples. For example, I think it's in Tykocin. In the museum in Tykocin at some point received a complete of praying utilities, tefillin and yarmulka and towels that the owner, the person that offered it to purchase for purchase claimed that it was once owned by the rabbi from Janów Podlaski, although that's the only information. They have the information only because it was not purchased straight from the offerer, but it was given through the DESA. As I mentioned, DESA was the national government owned enterprise that it ruled the art market and the antiquity market, and all the offerings that came through DESA, they came indirectly, so the museum didn't have much occasion to ask any details. The offerer claimed that he knew that it was owned by the rabbi because he left it in a safe place in the hands of the offerer, and he never came back. So in Włodawa, the situations, I think there were couple more things that had the provenance also only by the claim of the offerer. There was some tablecloths, I think, and some glasses that the offerer claimed that they belonged to one of the Lublin Jewish families, and they left it. In the hands of the offerer again when they were trying to escape the war. So these are the cases. As for the paintings I showed at one of the slides, they were not owned by the museum. It was a landed exhibition. I think it was landed by the museum in Lublin, but I'm not sure if there were the paintings and the drawings from the collection of museum in Lublin, or it was, I have to check it, if it was the Lublin collection or it was landed to Lublin, to museum in Lublin, and then passed for a temporary exhibition to Włodawa. There are in Tykocin, there are, I think, about 40 paintings that are categorized as Jewish, although they don't have the separate book inventory in the museum. They are in the inventory of the paintings and drawings department. There's not department per se, but this kind of objects have a separate inventory, and the Judaica are in the arts and crafts inventory. Some of them are very loosely connected with the Jewish theme. Because there are, for example, there is just a view of a Tykocin synagogue made by Zygmunt Bujnowski. Bujnowski was a painter that came from the surroundings of Tykocin, and so one of the chiefs of the museum decided to purchase a lot of his paintings as a local artist. So one of these paintings is just showing the synagogue. So it is actually
there was one I think this was in this slide what you showed us with the table set for Sedel.
Oh, yeah.
So there was on a wall a painting hanging.
Oh, yes.
So just as a question, just as an example, if I find out what these paintings, by whom they are, who painted them, if any more information, is there a person that I can write to?
I actually have the partially made photos of the inventories. So I think that I can give you some basic information about it, at least about the Tykocin. And I still owe you the list from my museum, so we can make it a whole batch. And I'm not sure if I have the whole list of the Włodawa paintings. However, only part of them are by known authors. In Tykocin, for example,
these portraits that were on a wall, that you said this was a temporary exhibition.
Oh yeah, this was a temporary exhibition, but I think there is a script of this exhibition, or at least a bigger photographic report on this exhibition. So, or I think that it could be just a good idea to, if not, if we won't find anything else, to ask in the Lublin Museum. So we will stay in contact.
Okay, great.
On this topic. One thing I only want to add, there is in Tykocin, there is the painting they are mostly proud of, although there are some analysis that show that it may not be the original, is the Jewish woman with the Shabbos candles, signed by Franciszek Smuglewicz, which was a Polish author, pretty known in Poland, but I'm not sure if I heard it correctly, but they gave it to the conservation, and there were some doubts if the signature is original. I don't actually know the whole story, but one of these paintings is signed by Franciszek Smuglewicz. So this is one of the examples of the paintings that are signed. There are not many of them. So.
But thank you very much. So I'll be happy to get this, what you ever have about the list that you corrected. Thanks.
Okay, I think I'm the last. Hi, Kinga, I really happy to see you after our meeting in Krakow. Wonderful days there. And I have other comments, contemplations. First of them is about these two cases that are really exceptional. I think it's the eastmost synagogues turned to museums during the Soviet period. Second, only perhaps to the old synagogue in Krakow and Art Shul in Prague. So it's very curious cases where the Soviet powers just prompted the opening Jewish museums in synagogues. and I must just highly estimate the work of the team of Białystok Restoration Office in their work on the Tykocin synagogue. It was a wonderful and well-documented and very structured work they did in the late 70s. These cases are very interesting and very curious. This subtext of political subtext of the opening of these two museums. My second comment or just contemplation is about the really treasure that we have in both places in the form of the very building and its decoration. Mm-hmm. So both these museums are kind of almost boring ethnographic museums of very obsolete kind, with some of Jewish objects and imitation of Jewish customs and so on. But the structures of these both synagogues and the paintings and the inscriptions are more than curious and may attract attention of visitors, not less than these objects, with all my really estimation to the objects. And unfortunately, in none of these places, the guides really refer to this symbolic context, to this historical context on the buildings. And we have here really a huge gap between the research on these synagogues. Yes, frankly, part of research in Hebrew highly available in Poland, but some of research is in English. And what is told to the visitors in situ. So I think it's a lot to do there. Okay, so these were my questions tonight. No questions. Tonight. We are tired. And maybe we have one more private question after the end of our meeting with Miriam. Yes. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I agree completely with what you said. We have slightly different situation in Weinzut. However, the Weinzut synagogue is not a state-owned museum anymore. It's owned by the Foundation for Jewish Heritage. But it's guarded by a very special man, Mr. Mirosław Kędzior, who is a passionate, and he solely gives the tours around the synagogue. So he's actually really really thorough in the stories he says to the tourists. But mostly these are the tourists from not from the Weinzut itself. These are the receivers of this knowledge are mostly not the Weinzut people itself themselves, but mostly the tourists from Poland, from around the world, actually. But yeah, but in Tykocin and in Włodawa, the topic drowns in the whole pool of many topics, actually, because they are trying to at the same time speak about the history, speak about the regional culture, and speak about the Jewish culture. The problem is although I didn't see the last version of the exhibition in Tykocin. The problem is that they do not combine, they are not combined. They're mostly the Jewish history, the Jewish aspect is shown separately from the history of the town itself. So there's still this this gap, this I don't know how to say it, this dissonance
Yes, you're
in
right.
the history
Yes.
itself and in how it's
Absolutely.
shown.
Yes. And about Tykocin, it's really a wonderful place and wonderful people. I remember them in early 90s, young, very energetic boys, experts in Orthodox icons who dealt with the synagogue. I think
Yeah.
it's wonderful, yes. Okay, so.
Okay, thank you again.
Thank you very
Kinga,
much.
For the lecture and fascinating discussion. And for all the others, thank you so much. And we'll see you again next week at 4. And by then, להתראות.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
After you stop the recording,
you.
we stay for a minute.
Okay.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you to all.